For years, a millionaire has carried the weight of a heartbreaking mystery, the disappearance of his beloved daughter. One fateful day, a chance encounter with a store clerk wearing a familiar pendant reignites hope and dread in equal measure. This pendant, once gifted to his daughter, holds the key to uncovering decades-old secrets. As he delves deeper, long-buried truths come to light, forcing him to face betrayal, danger, and the possibility of redemption. Will he find his daughter, or will the answers shatter him forever? The millionaire sat in his opulent study, surrounded by evidence of a life well lived, priceless art, gleaming awards, and bound leather books lining the shelves. But none of it mattered. His gaze rested on a small, worn photograph of a little girl with wide, innocent eyes and a radiant smile. It was his daughter, Sarah, the light of his life who had vanished without a trace decades ago. The mansion, the wealth, the accolades, they were all meaningless without her. This emptiness gnawed at him daily, a shadow that followed him everywhere, a constant reminder of his failure to protect her. He remembered the day she disappeared like it had happened yesterday. It had been a sunny afternoon, perfect for their planned trip to the park. She had begged to stop at a nearby shop to buy candy. He had agreed, letting her run ahead while he stayed back to answer a phone call that seemed urgent at the time. When he looked up moments later, she was gone. Panic set in as he searched frantically, calling her name and questioning anyone nearby. Hours turned into days, then weeks. The police had their theories, kidnapping, trafficking, but no concrete leads ever emerged. He poured every resource he had into finding her, hiring private investigators, plastering her face on posters, and even offering a massive reward for any information leading to her whereabouts. Years passed with no word. Friends and family encouraged him to move on, but he couldn't. How could a father give up on his child? The void she left consumed him, and every night he tortured himself with what-ifs and if-onlys. The guilt was paralyzing. If only he had held her hand a little tighter, paid a little more attention, or been more present. The world might see a successful businessman, but inside, he felt like a complete failure. The loss of his daughter had hardened him, turning him into a recluse. He avoided relationships, isolated himself from the world, and poured all his energy into his work. But even the deals and boardroom victories couldn't fill the emptiness. Decades later, a glimmer of hope surfaced. He had traveled to a small, unassuming town for a business deal, hoping the change of scenery might quiet his restless mind. He wandered into a quaint little shop, the kind of place that seemed frozen in time. As he browsed absent-mindedly, something caught his eye. It was the pendant around the neck of the young clerk behind the counter, a delicate piece of jewelry shaped like a heart, engraved with tiny initials that were unmistakably familiar. His heart stopped. He had given that pendant to Sarah on her 8th birthday. She had loved it, never taking it off, claiming it was her lucky charm. Now it was here, around the neck of a stranger in a random town. His hands trembled as he approached her. She looked up, startled by his intensity. "Excuse me," he said, his voice shaky. "Where did you get that pendant?" The girl hesitated, clutching the pendant protectively. "I've always had it," she said cautiously. "It's been with me since I was little." His breath hitched. Could it be? Was this girl somehow connected to Sarah? He wanted to believe it, but he was also terrified of the answer. Desperation tinged his voice as he pressed further. "Do you remember who gave it to you, or where you got it?" She shook her head, her expression guarded. "I don't know. I've had it for as long as I can remember. It's special to me." His heart sank and soared simultaneously. This pendant, her words, everything pointed to a connection. But was it real, or was his mind conjuring hope where there was none? He couldn't let it go. He had to know the truth, no matter what it took. He left the shop in a daze, his mind racing. He knew he needed help to piece together this puzzle. As soon as he reached his hotel, he called his most trusted private investigator, a man who had never failed him in uncovering the truth. The pendant was a tangible clue, and he was determined to follow it wherever it led. For the first time in years, the millionaire felt a spark of hope. But that hope came with fear. What if the truth was more painful than the mystery? What if the girl who owned the pendant wasn't Sarah, but someone who had unknowingly crossed paths with her during a dark chapter of her disappearance? Or worse, what if the pendant led to a revelation he wasn't ready to face? The possibilities were endless, and they terrified him. Still, he couldn't stop now. Decades of longing and unanswered questions had brought him to this moment. He didn't know where the road would lead, but for the first time in years, he felt a sense of purpose. The pendant had reawakened his drive, and he would follow this lead no matter where it took him. The days following the encounter at the shop were a whirlwind of anticipation, dread, and action. The millionaire couldn't shake the image of the young clerk with the pendant. Her eyes wary but kind, her demeanor strikingly familiar in ways he couldn't explain. As he waited for his private investigator to dig deeper, he replayed their conversation in his mind over and over, scrutinizing every word, every expression, every hesitation. Why had she been so protective of the pendant? Was it because it held sentimental value, or was there more to her story? The millionaire wasn't a man prone to superstition, but he couldn't deny the profound sense of destiny he felt. It was as if the universe had finally aligned to give him the clue he had been searching for all these years. Yet, with hope came an undercurrent of fear. Fear of disappointment, fear of opening old wounds, fear of what the truth might reveal. The private investigator, a seasoned professional named James, arrived in the small town 2 days later. James had been with the millionaire through countless cases over the years, from uncovering corporate espionage to tracing distant relatives. But even he knew this case was different. "This one's personal," the millionaire had told him. "I need answers, James, and I need them fast." James started with the shop itself, posing as a customer to strike up a casual conversation with the clerk. She introduced herself as Lily, and her story was as ordinary as they came, or so it seemed. She had grown up in a foster home, shuffled from one family to another, never staying in one place for too long. Her earliest memories were hazy, but she remembered clutching the pendant whenever she felt scared or alone. It had been her one constant, a piece of her identity that she couldn't explain but couldn't let go of either. From the shop, James expanded his investigation, digging into Lily's background. Her foster care records were sparse, riddled with gaps that hinted at a chaotic childhood. The families who had taken her in described her as quiet and withdrawn, a child who kept to herself and rarely spoke of her past. One foster mother recalled that Lily had arrived with nothing but the clothes on her back and the pendant around her neck. "She wouldn't let anyone touch it," the woman had said. "It was like a lifeline for her." Meanwhile, the millionaire struggled to contain his impatience. Every update from James was both a relief and a source of frustration. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture was still incomplete. Late at night, he found himself staring at Sarah's photograph, willing the answers to come. Was it possible that Lily could be his daughter? Or was he chasing a mirage, desperate to find meaning in a world that had taken so much from him? Then, James uncovered a breakthrough. While combing through old records, he found a report from a small clinic where Lily had been treated as a child. The report mentioned a man who had brought her in, claiming to be her uncle. The description of the man sent chills down the millionaire's spine. It matched the appearance of his former business partner, a man with whom he had severed ties under bitter circumstances shortly before Sarah's disappearance. This revelation sent the millionaire spiraling. He hadn't thought of his old rival in years, but now the memories came flooding back. Their partnership had ended in betrayal, with accusations of fraud and sabotage. Could this man have been involved in Sarah's disappearance? And if so, why? Determined to confront his past, the millionaire tasked James with tracking down his former partner. The trail led to a secluded estate in a neighboring state, where the man had been living a quiet, reclusive life. When the millionaire arrived at the estate, he felt a surge of anger and apprehension. This man might hold the answers he had been seeking for decades, or he might be the key to uncovering a truth too painful to bear. The confrontation was intense, filled with accusations and denials. At first, the rival feigned ignorance, dismissing the millionaire's questions with scoffs and derision. But when the pendant was brought up, his demeanor changed. He grew defensive, his answers evasive. It became clear that he knew more than he was letting on. Finally, under the weight of the millionaire's persistence and the threat of legal action, the man admitted that he had been involved in Sarah's disappearance. But his explanation was far more twisted than the millionaire could have imagined. He revealed that Sarah had been taken as leverage in a scheme to force the millionaire into a business deal, a scheme that had spiraled out of control when Sarah escaped from her captors. The revelation was devastating. The millionaire's worst fears had come true. His daughter's disappearance had been orchestrated by someone he had once trusted. But amidst the pain, there was hope. If Sarah had escaped, then she might still be out there. And Lily's existence, her connection to the pendant, suggested that the trail was far from cold. With this new information, the millionaire and James doubled down on their efforts, determined to find Sarah and uncover the truth. The journey was far from over, but for the first time in years, the millionaire felt a sense of purpose. He wasn't just chasing shadows anymore, he was chasing a future, one that held the promise of reunion and redemption. James worked tirelessly to follow the breadcrumbs uncovered during his investigation, but the deeper he delved, the murkier the story became. The man who had admitted to orchestrating Sarah's disappearance was evasive about key details, especially about what happened after Sarah escaped. Yet there was one critical lead, a name he mentioned in passing, a woman named Martha, who had once been involved with the rival's illicit dealings. James honed in on this name, piecing together fragments of Martha's identity. Eventually, he discovered that she had retired to a small coastal town, living in quiet obscurity. The millionaire felt a mixture of hope and dread as they prepared to meet Martha. If she had information about Sarah, why hadn't she come forward all these years? What if she was complicit in the events that tore his family apart? Despite his apprehension, he knew he had to confront her. The possibility of a breakthrough outweighed his fears. Martha turned out to be an older woman in her late 60s, with sharp eyes that suggested she hadn't lost her edge despite her years of isolation. When James and the millionaire arrived unannounced at her modest home, she regarded them warily, but there was a flicker of recognition when the millionaire introduced himself. Her hesitation gave way to a sigh, and she invited them in, sensing the weight of the moment. "I figured this day might come," Martha said as they sat around her small kitchen table. Her voice carried a mixture of regret and defiance. "You're here about your daughter." The millionaire leaned forward, his heart racing. "What do you know about Sarah? Where is she?" Martha looked at him with an expression that was almost pitying. "I don't know where she is now," she admitted, "but I know what happened after she got away." Martha's story unfolded slowly, each revelation striking like a blow. She had been tasked with overseeing Sarah after the rival's plan to use her as leverage fell apart. When Sarah escaped, she hadn't gone far. Martha had found her hiding in a nearby warehouse, scared and disoriented. Rather than turning her over to the rival, Martha made a decision that would haunt her for the rest of her life. She let Sarah go. "She was just a little girl," Martha said, her voice breaking. "She looked up at me with those big, terrified eyes, and I couldn't do it. I gave her a bit of money, told her to run, and I never saw her again." The millionaire was stunned. On one hand, he felt gratitude toward Martha for showing compassion to his daughter when no one else had. On the other hand, he was consumed by anger and frustration. Why hadn't Martha come forward? Why hadn't she told him this sooner? "I thought about it," Martha admitted when he pressed her, but by then it was too late. The man who orchestrated this mess had too much power, too many ways to hurt me. I was scared. And then, as the years went by, I convinced myself it was better to stay quiet. But I've regretted it every day since." The millionaire struggled to process the flood of emotions. Martha's story added another piece to the puzzle but left him with even more questions. Where had Sarah gone after Martha let her go? What had happened to her in the years since? The only clue Martha could provide was the direction in which Sarah had fled. A vague lead, but one that reignited the millionaire's hope. With this new information, James began searching the region where Sarah might have gone. The task was daunting. Decades had passed and the trail was cold. Still, the pendant around Lily's neck kept them going. It was proof that Sarah's story hadn't ended in tragedy, that she had survived long enough to pass on a piece of herself. As they dug deeper, they uncovered a string of foster homes and shelters that had taken in a girl matching Sarah's description in the months following her escape. Each lead painted a picture of a child who had endured unimaginable hardships but who had also displayed remarkable resilience. The girl, often identified as Anna or Emily in various records, seemed to vanish and reappear at random, as if she were constantly on the move. For the millionaire, these revelations were bittersweet. On one hand, they confirmed that Sarah had survived her initial ordeal. On the other hand, they revealed the harsh realities she had faced while he had been powerless to help her. He couldn't shake the guilt, the feeling that he had failed her. But he also couldn't give up. One day, James uncovered a breakthrough. Among the records, he found mention of a small charity that had operated in the region during the time Sarah would have been on the run. The charity, run by a woman named Margaret, had provided shelter and resources to vulnerable children. When James contacted Margaret, she remembered a girl who fit Sarah's description: quiet, scared, and fiercely protective of a pendant she wore around her neck. Margaret recounted how the girl had stayed with them for a few months before disappearing again. "She never talked about her past," Margaret said, "but she had a strength about her, like she was determined to survive, no matter what." The millionaire clung to Margaret's words as they traveled to meet her. It was another step forward, another piece of the puzzle. Each encounter brought him closer to Sarah, but also closer to the truth about the life she had been forced to live. As they sat in Margaret's modest office, surrounded by photographs of the children she had helped over the years, the millionaire felt a mix of hope and apprehension. Margaret handed him a file containing a few sketches and notes about Sarah's time at the shelter. "She didn't leave much behind," Margaret said, "but she left an impression. I always wondered what happened to her. I hope you find her." The millionaire studied the sketches, his heart aching as he recognized traces of Sarah in the young girl's features. It was another step forward, another confirmation that his daughter was out there somewhere. But the journey was far from over. James and the millionaire began piecing together the fragments of Sarah's journey after she disappeared from Margaret's shelter. Each clue revealed a young girl who was resourceful and determined to survive, despite the odds stacked against her. One promising lead surfaced when James discovered an old newspaper article about a runaway teenager who had been spotted hitchhiking near the state border. The girl's description matched Sarah's perfectly. This lead pointed them toward a town on the other side of the border, a small community known for its transient population. James and the millionaire set out immediately, their hopes cautiously high. Upon arriving, they began canvassing the area, speaking to anyone who might remember a girl fitting Sarah's description from all those years ago. Most people shook their heads, unable to recall, but an elderly shopkeeper had a different reaction when shown an old sketch of Sarah. "She stayed here for a while," the shopkeeper said, her voice tinged with both sympathy and curiosity. "She didn't say much, but you could tell she'd been through a lot. She worked odd jobs around town, cleaning, babysitting, that sort of thing. She was just a kid trying to make her way." The shopkeeper went on to describe how Sarah had eventually moved on, leaving behind only faint memories and a sense of gratitude for the kindness she had been shown. This pattern repeated itself as they followed Sarah's trail, each town revealing brief glimpses of her life before she vanished again. Despite the challenges, The millionaire was relentless. Every new clue brought him closer to Sarah, but it also deepened his understanding of the hardships she had endured. He couldn't help but imagine the fear and loneliness she must have felt, constantly on the move, never knowing who to trust. It fueled his determination to find her, no matter how long it took. Then, a breakthrough came. James uncovered a decades-old record from a charity organization in yet another town, listing a teenage girl named Emily, an alias Sarah had likely used, as one of their beneficiaries. The charity had since disbanded, but a former volunteer, now living in a nearby city, agreed to meet with them. The volunteer, a warm and empathetic woman named Linda, remembered Sarah vividly. She had this aura about her, Linda said. She was quiet, but incredibly strong. She never talked about her past, but you could tell she'd been through a lot. She stayed with us for a while, helping out with the younger kids. She was wonderful with them. Linda revealed something else. Sarah had formed a close bond with another girl at the charity, a fellow runaway named Kate. The two had been inseparable during their time there, supporting each other through their shared struggles. "I always wondered what happened to them," Linda admitted. "They left together one day, saying they were going to start fresh somewhere else. I never heard from them again." This revelation provided a new avenue to explore. If they could find Kate, they might find Sarah. James began digging into Kate's past, tracing her movements in the years since she left the charity. It was a painstaking process, but eventually they located her. Kate was now a middle-aged woman, living a quiet life in a rural area. When James and the millionaire approached her, she was hesitant at first, wary of their intentions. But when they explained who they were and why they had come, her guarded demeanor softened. "I haven't seen Sarah in years," Kate said, her voice tinged with sadness. "We were like sisters back then, but life pulled us in different directions. The last time I saw her, she was heading to a big city. She wanted to find stability, maybe even reconnect with her family. She talked about you a lot," she added, glancing at the millionaire. "She missed you." Hearing this broke the millionaire's heart. Sarah had thought of him, even as she navigated the harsh realities of life on her own. He couldn't shake the guilt that he hadn't been there for her when she needed him most. But Kate's words also gave him hope. If Sarah had been looking for stability, perhaps she had found it. Perhaps she was still out there, waiting to be found. The millionaire and James followed Kate's lead, turning their attention to the city Sarah had mentioned. It was a daunting prospect, searching for one woman in a sprawling metropolis, but they were undeterred. They began by reaching out to shelters, community centers, and social services, hoping someone might remember Sarah. Their efforts eventually paid off when they came across a counselor who had worked with a woman matching Sarah's description years earlier. She went by the name Anna, the counselor said. She was struggling, but determined to turn her life around. She talked about her family a lot, especially her father. She said he was the reason she kept going. The counselor didn't know where Sarah was now, but her words reignited the millionaire's determination. He was closer than ever, and he wasn't about to give up. Each step brought him closer to the daughter he had lost, and he vowed to do whatever it took to find her. As the search continued, the millionaire found himself reflecting on the journey so far. It had been a long and painful road, filled with heartache and regret, but it had also been a journey of growth and discovery, a chance to confront the mistakes of the past and make amends. For the first time in years, he felt a glimmer of hope, not just for a reunion with Sarah, but for the possibility of healing and redemption. The search for Sarah led the millionaire and James into the heart of the sprawling city, a place teeming with life, but also shadows where people could disappear. They scoured shelters, community outreach programs, and even hospitals, armed with the few details they had gathered from their journey. Each day brought a mixture of hope and frustration as they navigated countless leads that either turned cold or led to dead ends. James's tenacity remained unwavering, his investigative skills proving invaluable. Through his network, he managed to locate a retired social worker who had worked extensively with at-risk populations in the area. The woman, Mrs. Hargrove, invited them into her modest apartment, her curiosity piqued by their story. "I remember her," Mrs. Hargrove said after seeing the old photograph of Sarah. "She was scared but determined. She said she wanted a fresh start. I think she mentioned something about working with children. She loved kids. That's all I can recall. It's been years." The clue, though vague, was a breakthrough. The millionaire felt a flicker of hope. If Sarah had pursued work involving children, there might be official records or someone who remembered her. James began scouring job listings and databases, narrowing their search to nonprofits, schools, and childcare centers. Their determination paid off when they came across a community center on the outskirts of the city that provided free childcare and educational programs for low-income families. One of the employees, a woman named Clara, remembered Sarah vividly. "She was amazing with the kids," Clara said, her face lighting up. "She had this way of making everyone feel special. But one day, she just left. No explanation. We were all heartbroken, especially the children. I think she was running from something. Or someone." Clara's words confirmed what the millionaire had feared. Sarah had been living in survival mode, always looking over her shoulder. But Clara also provided a new lead. Sarah had confided in her about a friend she had made at the center, a woman named Elena, who might know more. When they tracked down Elena, she was initially hesitant to speak, clearly protective of Sarah's privacy. But as the millionaire shared his story, his regret, and his longing to reconnect with his daughter, Elena's demeanor softened. "Sarah was a survivor," Elena began, her voice filled with admiration. "She didn't trust easily, but when she did, she was fiercely loyal. She talked about you sometimes. She missed you but was scared to reach out. She thought you might hate her for leaving." Hearing this shattered the millionaire's heart. The idea that Sarah had carried such a burden of guilt and fear was almost too much to bear. Elena went on to reveal that Sarah had taken a job in another city, working as a live-in caretaker for a family. She had hoped the stability would help her start fresh. With this new information, the millionaire and James resumed their search, their focus shifting to tracking down Sarah's former employers. It was a painstaking process, involving countless phone calls and visits, but eventually they found the family Sarah had worked for. The mother, Mrs. Thompson, was kind but cautious as she invited them into her home. "Sarah was wonderful," she said, her eyes reflecting fondness. "She was more than a caretaker. She became part of our family. But one day, she just left. No warning, no goodbye. I always worried something had happened to her." Mrs. Thompson's words deepened the mystery. Why had Sarah left so abruptly? And where had she gone? The millionaire couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah was still running, haunted by the past. But Mrs. Thompson provided one final crucial clue: a journal Sarah had accidentally left behind. The journal was a treasure trove of insights into Sarah's life, filled with sketches, poetry, and reflections. It was clear she had been searching for peace and stability, but it was also evident she had been grappling with unresolved pain and fear. In one of the entries, Sarah had written about a small coastal town where she dreamed of living one day, a place where she could start anew and leave her past behind. The millionaire felt a surge of hope. This could be where she had gone. With renewed determination, the millionaire and James set out for the coastal town, their spirits buoyed by the possibility of finally finding Sarah. The journey was long, but the thought of a reunion kept them going. Upon arriving in the idyllic town, they began their search, speaking to locals and showing Sarah's photo. At first, there were no promising leads, but then an elderly artist at a beachfront cafe recognized her. "She's here," the artist said, her face lighting up. "She lives in a little house by the water. She keeps to herself mostly, but she's kind. She painted a mural for the community center recently. It's beautiful." The millionaire's heart raced as he and James followed the directions to the house. It was a quaint, weathered cottage surrounded by wildflowers and overlooking the ocean. The scene was peaceful, almost surreal. Standing on the doorstep, the millionaire hesitated, overcome with emotion. What would he say? How would Sarah react? Gathering his courage, he knocked on the door. When it opened, the woman standing there took his breath away. It was Sarah, older and with a strength in her eyes that spoke of all she had endured and overcome. For a moment, they simply stared at each other, the weight of years and unspoken words hanging between them. Finally, Sarah broke the silence. "Dad?" she said, her voice trembling. The millionaire's response was a choked whisper. "It's me, Sarah. I've been looking for you." As they embraced, years of pain and regret melted away, replaced by the profound relief of finally being reunited. It was a moment neither of them would ever forget, the culmination of a journey that had tested their resilience and their love for each other. The moment Sarah opened the door and saw her father standing there, it felt as if time froze. For years, she had convinced herself that this day would never come, that the man who had once been the center of her world had moved on, or worse, forgotten her entirely. But now, here he was, looking older, wiser, and far more vulnerable than she remembered. The reunion was a whirlwind of emotions. At first, they simply stood in silence, gazing at each other, overwhelmed by the gravity of the moment. Then, as if a dam had broken, Sarah fell into her father's arms, and he held her tightly, tears streaming down his face. Neither of them cared about the years of estrangement or the unspoken words that had built walls between them. In that moment, all that mattered was that they had found each other again. Inside the cozy cottage, Sarah made tea while her father marveled at the life she had built. The walls were adorned with her paintings, vivid, emotive pieces that told stories of both pain and resilience. The little space was filled with warmth and character, a reflection of the woman Sarah had become. They talked for hours, starting with lighthearted anecdotes about Sarah's life in the coastal town. She shared how she had found solace in art and how the ocean's constant rhythm had become a source of healing. The conversation then turned to the journal her father had found, and Sarah was surprised to learn how much of her life it had revealed. "I never meant to leave it behind," she admitted, her voice tinged with regret. "But maybe it was meant to lead you here." Her father nodded, his gaze unwavering. "It did, and it showed me just how much I missed, how much I didn't fight for you when I should have." Sarah hesitated, then placed a hand on his. "You couldn't have known, Dad. I didn't make it easy for you to find me. I thought disappearing was the only way to survive." The conversation grew heavier as they delved into the past. Sarah spoke of the fear and pain that had driven her away, of the threats she had endured and the sacrifices she had made to protect herself. Her father listened intently, his heart breaking with every word. "I wish I had been there for you," he said, his voice trembling. "I wish I had protected you from all of it." "But you're here now," Sarah replied, her tone resolute, "and that means everything." As the night wore on, they began to piece together the fractured memories of their shared past, filling in the gaps with stories and confessions. Sarah asked about the old pendant, the one her father had given her before she disappeared. "I saw it on a clerk at a gas station," he explained. "It was the only clue I had, but it led me straight to you." Sarah smiled, a mixture of disbelief and gratitude washing over her. It's amazing how something so small could connect us after all this time. The next day, Sarah decided to show her father more of her world. She took him to the community center where she had painted the mural, introducing him to the people who had become her second family. The children greeted her with shouts of excitement, their joy infectious. Seeing how much of an impact Sarah had made in the lives of others filled her father with pride. Later, they walked along the beach, the waves crashing against the shore as they talked about the future. It was here that Sarah revealed her deepest fear, that reconnecting with her father might bring back the ghosts of her past. "They'll always be a part of my story," she said, gazing out at the horizon. "But I refuse to let them define me anymore. I've come too far to go back." Her father reached for her hand. "And you'll never have to face them alone again. I promise." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, they stood together, united by their shared resolve. It was a new beginning for both of them, one forged through pain but strengthened by love. In the weeks that followed, the millionaire found ways to integrate himself into Sarah's life without overwhelming her. He supported her art and even helped organize an exhibition at a prestigious gallery in the city, ensuring her talent would receive the recognition it deserved. Sarah, in turn, began to visit her father's world, slowly reconnecting with the life she had left behind. Together, they confronted the ghosts of their pasts, not with fear, but with the strength they had found in each other. The reunion wasn't just a moment. It was the start of a journey that neither of them could have taken alone. And as they stood side by side at Sarah's art exhibition, surrounded by people marveling at her work, the millionaire knew he had finally found the redemption he had been seeking. His long-lost daughter had not only survived, but thrived, and he was determined to be there for every moment of her future. For Sarah, the journey had been one of pain, resilience, and rediscovery, and now, with her father by her side, she was ready to embrace the life she had fought so hard to build.